Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. My guest on One of a Kind is Heather Adamson Stockman, a former dancer for the Scottish Highlanders. This year, 2011, marks the 75th anniversary of this unique and colorful bagpipe band. The purpose of the Highlanders was to promote, teach, and perform the Scottish arts of piping, drumming, and dancing. For those new to Iowa City, the Highlanders entertained the fans during the football games at the University Stadium and marched in the parades. Heather Stockman's father, William Adamson, was recruited in 1937 to lead the group by the creator of the Highlanders, Colonel George F.N. Daly, from the ROTC department at the university. The Highlanders at first were all male, but by 1943, most of the men were called to service in World War II. So it transitioned to an all-female group. Heather's grandparents were from Scotland and immigrated to the United States. Her grandfather was a bagpipe maker and the only one in the U.S. Heather's father became an accomplished bagpiper and played in bands back east. And in 1935, he won top honors internationally in bagpiping and the Highland dance. Heather and two other former Highlanders have worked tirelessly to create an exhibit highlighting its history and accomplishments at the university. In early September of 2003, as part of the Scottish Highlanders' 75th anniversary celebration, the display honoring the role of the Highlanders was unveiled and dedicated. Welcome to One of a Kind, Heather.
Thank you.
Now, this, for many people who are new to Iowa City or recent Iowa Cityans, tell them about the Scottish Highlanders, because if we're old enough and have been here around, we love the Scottish Highlanders.
Well, for someone just coming into Iowa City, because the group no longer exists, they probably wouldn't have heard anything about it. It's a great part of Iowa City history, University of Iowa history, state of Iowa history, and American history because of all the things that they accomplished over their 75-year history. And those are kind of little-known facts at this point. So that's the type of thing that we tried to bring out in our display and so forth, is the historical aspect of the Highlanders' contributions. So those would be little-known facts to a newcomer to Iowa City. So we just want to tell that story about what they did during their time here.
Now, when it started, like I said in the introduction, it was in the ROTC department.
Correct.
And it was all male. Talk
Correct.
about this.
Yes, it was began as a military unit with the ROTC, but as an accompaniment to the military unit. Because back then, especially with wartime venues and so forth, it was common to have a bagpipe band accompany their military unit and fire them up and get them ready for combat and so forth. Often even the Navy ships during the war had a bagpiper on their board to entice the fighters and so forth. But so that's how it began, with the accompaniment to the military unit. And Colonel George Daly had envisioned this after a trip to Edinburgh, Scotland, and saw the military performances of the bagpipe bands there and thought this would be a unique opportunity to start something like this at Iowa. So that's the reason it began. And at that time, kilts and bagpipes were only accomplished Scotsmen and male gender only.
Well, who could teach somebody to play the bagpipe?
Good question.
And how hard is it to learn to play the
Yes,
bagpipe?
they didn't come out of a cornfield,
No.
but the Colonel Daly had an eager young ROTC gentleman who he actually sent to Canada for a brief lesson period of learning to play the bagpipe. His name was Cloyce Myers, and so he came back and trained a few people. They actually went to City High School and recruited young men who were to be graduating soon and with an interest in attending the University of Iowa, making a commitment to the ROCT department with the enticement of travel, uniforms, instrument instruction. And back in the late 30s, this was a fantastic opportunity because people did not have travel experience or anything anywhere near that type of opportunity. So they recruited, I think, about 8 young men from City High School. And then when my father came on board, he put those men together and recruited college men. So their first football performance at a football game at the University of Iowa Stadium was in 1937, that very fall. And they put it all together in short order, and there were over 30 members then.
You brought a picture of a longtime Iowa Cityan, Dick Fedderson,
Yes.
was a Highlander recruited out of City High.
He was, that's right.
Yes. So, okay, so then World War II began, and so they needed more dancers, more pipers.
Well,
so what
suddenly the fate of the organization was at hand, and the question came up, what happens now? Because at that time they then had 75 members, and 71 of those males went to serve his country. So the thought was, what about transitioning to female? And the response was overwhelming. It was warmly embraced by everyone, and young women chose the University of Iowa as their college of choice because of the Scottish Highlanders' potential membership. And so it really blossomed and soon became the world's largest bagpipe band.
Are you in the Guinness Book of World Records?
Good question. I don't know. I'll have to find that out.
Find that out. You should
Yes.
be if it isn't in there.
But in doing the research for our display at the Hawkeye Hall of Fame, I found a note in my father's files at the archives stating that September at tryouts, he expected over 500 young women to show up
My goodness.
wishing to be potential Highlanders. And they only had 35 openings at the time. So it was quite an impressive,
And an honor to get
yes,
in.
exactly.
Besides an interest in wearing these wonderful costumes
Right,
and
the
playing
uniqueness,
the
if you can imagine.
What else were the requirements? Were there anything else other than
Well, it
interest?
was kind of amusing because also in the notes that I found at the archives, my father's philosophy was he wanted good Iowa girls, good character, good morals, commitment, that type of a person. And so the tryouts, it was kind of interesting because I used to accompany him to the tryouts and carry his notepads and so forth, and as a child. And he would break the group of 500 or however many happened to show up into smaller groups of maybe 15 to 20 girls and have one active member with that group of tryout gals, teaching them the Highland Fling, which was more to take up time and keep them busy while he made it around to the other groups, selecting the gals. So although they were focusing on their technique and their skill and everything, what he was looking for was just someone that could walk and chew gum at the same time type of thing and had a pleasant personality. If they had music background, of course that was a plus. If they had marching band experience in their high school, that was a plus. But bottom line, just good American girls in that reflection.
And usually there were how many women in the group? Was there a
In the
set
actual
number?
performing group, there was usually around 80, 85. You had to complete proficiency tests before each performance. So just because you performed in the last one didn't mean that you were eligible for the next one. So the requirements were quite stringent to keep up the skills, which was kind of an important part. So they had to pass these proficiency tests, and then they were able to qualify for the next performance. But there were probably about 125 to 150 active members, and of that, they would march actually on the field or at a performance about 85.
Before we get into the travels, let's just backtrack a little about your family. I just found it so fascinating that your grandfather, like I said in the introduction, made bagpipes, was the only bagpipe maker in the United States, if that isn't a first. Then here your father was a Highlander, directed, piped, danced, and your mother was, is that where they met?
No, they actually met. My father had a different full-time job and did this other as a hobby. And
This was a hobby?
This was a hobby.
Oh my goodness.
Prior to them coming to Iowa. So when they lived in Boston, he was a member of several bagpipe bands and did lots of competition. But he had a different full-time occupation as a businessman. And but his true passion always was with having his own bagpipe band someday.
Which he did. And
Which
then
he did.
His wife was a bagpiper.
Yes, they married while they were still in Boston. And then she learned the Highland dancing. And with the all-male group, originally there were 2 dancers, one of which was my mother, 2 female dancers. The men danced as well in that early group.
And so it was really an expectation that you too were going to be a Highlander?
You know, I never felt that, but there was no question in my mind but that's what I truly wanted. I had grown up with it. I loved the travel. I loved the experiences, the enrichment that it made on my life, and the friendships of all these people. And
Now you have 2 brothers?
I have 2 older brothers.
Did they get involved in bagpiping?
Why, no, but they were baggage managers.
Oh, okay.
The trips.
Oh, lucky them.
Yes.
But they got to travel.
Yeah, they did. And the first trip that the 3 of us children accompanied our parents and the group to Europe was in 1956. My oldest brother at that time was just graduated from high school. So he was in heaven to travel with 70 or 80 young college co-eds and be the only male other than my father, the director.
Oh, great. So when did you went to the bagpipers went to the World's Fair?
They did in 1937. 1939, I'm sorry.
And then the group started traveling abroad, and I read in the exhibit there's like 7 times?
7 times.
You went, where did they go beside, obviously Scotland?
Yes, that would be a
Number
must.
1.
Their first foreign travel was in 1952. And that maiden voyage was kind of an experiment. 1952, foreign travel just wasn't done. But they did. And I think it was about a 2-month trip, mostly in Scotland and England and performing there. And then they did visit a couple of other countries on the continent, France and Germany. And so that was kind of getting their feet wet in the international travel. Then they tried to do it every 4 years, and they succeeded for 7 consecutive times.
Did they raise money for their passage?
Each girl had to fund her own travel. So the university did not do any of that. but they, it was very worthwhile. And my father, being of Scottish heritage, he planned the entire trip and was very careful in keeping it at a modest fee for the girls.
Sure. And then I was reading in the exhibit that 2 years in a row, Iowa went to the Rose Bowl, and the Highlanders, they marched in the parade, they
Yes.
played at halftime, and I just want to, so I get this right, the first one was in 1957, and Iowa beat Oregon 35-19, and the Highlanders were there. And then in 1958, they played again, and they beat California 28-12. These are for the people who love sports
Oh,
statistics.
okay.
And you marched, and they marched down in the Pasadena parade and
Yep.
played at the road. That must have been
That's
quite.
correct.
Let's talk about the wonderful costumes and explain them, because you brought some, and they took some pictures of the outfits.
Yes.
And talk about what they mean and their names and the tradition.
They're actually called uniforms, and they are comprised of the tartan of choice that my father used for the band was of the Stuart tartan, and that was the royal family's tartan. So it comes in 3 different
Colors.
basically, and one is supposedly for dress, one is called Royal Stuart, and the third is hunting, so perhaps for a more casual attire. This goes back to ancient history. However, so they used the Stuart tartan for the Scottish Highlanders, and the pipers wore the Royal Stuart, which is the red kilts,
Okay, the pipers did that, okay.
with the navy doublets or jackets, and the feather bonnet called the busby.
And should we tell our viewers what it's made out of?
Ostrich feathers.
I know. I saw that.
Yes, they're
yes.
impressive.
Yes.
The uniforms were wool. The kilt is 7 yards of material. So the pleats are very deep, so with each movement it's quite showy. The stockings are wool. So you can imagine in the autumn heat, bit warm, or at a World's Fair in the summertime.
Sure.
They got a bit toasty. But then over the kilt they wore this horsehair sporran.
It's very
called.
ancient looking.
It is. What we wore was the more modern version. Originally the sporran was used more like a purse. So they
it
would
looks
keep
like.
their ammunition actually in that. So then they would have the plaid, which is another piece of tartan, matching tartan material to the kilt, which was draped over the shoulder. This is several yards of material as well, and was often used in earlier times as a blanket or something to wrap around the person to keep it warm. Obviously, the Highlanders used it as more of a part of the uniform.
And then the instruments. Let's talk about the pipe and explain a bit about the bagpipes, and then the drum, and then the dance on the drum.
Okay, the bagpipes originally in ancient times were an instrument of war, as I explained earlier, to kind of rev up the men for battle. It's comprised of 3 pipes called drones, which accompany the tune. Then there's a finger piece, which plays the tune, and then a mouthpiece that the person blows into.
And there are 4 reeds. Is that not?
That's correct.
In the bagpipe.
One in the chanter, the fingering part, and one in each of the drones. And then they're all attached to this bag, which is inflated by the player blowing into it, and then the fingering plays the music, the tune, as the player presses on the bag to release the sound through the drones and the chanter. So the drones have this dull humming accompaniment to the tune.
Now, in the Scottish very good. The Scottish Highlanders not all of the Highlanders played the pipes, did they?
No.
Or some danced, some
danced,
drummed,
some
and some
played
piped.
right.
Okay, so the drum. Talk about, we have the drum that you brought and the
Right.
drum heads, and
Right.
explain about that.
The bagpipe tunes were accompanied by snare drums, which is the ones we're all familiar with, and a tenor drum, which has a little lower tone, and then a bass drum, which has the much lower tone. So they use that combination to accompany the bagpipe music. The bass drum, when you were talking about the drum dance itself, which is a dance that my father originated, so he was the first one to perform it.
Really?
And the way it was done was there was a wooden platform that fit over this bass drum, and then about 6 hefty, strong, at the
Girls?
time men,
Yeah, man.
held the drum down, and the dancer would then hop up upon the platform, and then the drum was raised up onto the shoulders of these staunch men, and the dancer performed the dance on the drum
Did
during the
did
bagpipe.
your mother do that?
And my mother did that as well.
And you did it?
And then I did it.
You did, and you brought some wonderful pictures of that so they can see that. So how did it get started that all these celebrities signed their names on the drum heads? Where did that come from?
That's a good question. And I would just surmise that probably it began with their first travels, perhaps to the World's Fair. And whose idea this was, I don't know. It would be very interesting to find out exactly when it began and who started it. But actually, there are also some university dignitaries, early dignitaries, Professor Gilmore Hall, and Virgil Hancher, and so forth. And then as they traveled, they had different encounters, people to sign that as well.
And they watched him
internationally.
dance, and I mean, you brought pictures of Bob Hope,
Yes.
The Kennedys, Nixon, and there was even one of Mary Pickford. We
Yes.
didn't take
Yes.
a picture of that, but my goodness,
Yes.
that's quite.
And
quite
there's
a-
Rudy Valley and Tommy Dorsey.
and Jack Benny
Yes.
and Rochester.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
so everybody.
Jane
Well,
Mansfield.
they'll all, and some of those drum heads are at the exhibit, are they not?
They're reproductions that are at the exhibit at the Athletic Hall of Fame. The originals, which of those 3 drum heads, 2 of the originals were animal skin. And so being 75 years old, animal skin, it has become a little brittle, and it has some mars and some tears in it. So it's very fragile. We spoke to the exhibit fabricators about putting the originals because that's where we really wanted them. And they said no, that light would cause exposure damage and so forth. So we reluctantly made lovely reproductions, very realistic, digitized on canvas to look like the actual animal skin.
So tell me, people can go to this exhibit. It's not a very large one, but it's very, I think, very well done and very complete. 3rd floor of the U of I Athletic Hall of Fame.
Correct.
Athletics Hall of Fame, I guess they
Yes.
call it. Tell me about the 2 women and how did you gather all this information? And I'm sure it was a labor of love.
It was a labor of love. We began 6 years ago, and the other 2 women are Penny Clockseam Hall and Karen Rummels Lasjack. And we're all former Highlanders. Somewhere in the 60s, we were all members. So we were members when the group was at its prime. And we know the history. We know a lot of the history anyway.
Sure.
And after my father passed away in 1965, there was never another full-time director hired. And then in 1981, the university withdrew funding, all of the funding. Mm-hmm. So the group had to earn their own funds to do everything. So without the support and all that, the group kind of evolved into more of a social club mm-hmm. than a university representing band. So we could tell that the ranks were declining and feared the demise on the horizon. So we felt that now was the time to act, to convince the university to have some type of exhibit. We knew this treasure trove of memorabilia existed mm-hmm. that told these fantastic stories that we've talked about, and we just couldn't leave them in a box in a basement somewhere. So the three of us approached the various departments that housed the Scottish Highlanders through the years, and we were also aware that there were several thousands of dollars donated through the years to the foundation earmarked for the Highlanders. So with the demise on the horizon, what was going to happen to the funds, what was going to happen to the memorabilia, that was our concern. That's what we began 6 years ago. And from there, then began the search.
And you had, earlier this month, 2011, in mm-hmm. September, you had a reunion. And how many people came?
We had at least 350 people come. Our previous reunions have been about 200, mm-hmm. 225, so we would have been thrilled with 250. And we actually had to close registration early because we couldn't accommodate everyone.
Now, these weren't just members of it, these were family members who were wanted
exactly.
to be a part of this.
Exactly.
And so what were some of the comments with the display? I mean, what did you hear? Were people thrilled that,
absolutely.
that this was being honored,
yes.
the organization was being honored in
yes.
such a way?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely mind-blowing, yes. They were thrilled. And I still hear from, it's been over a month now, sure. and I still hear from people who attended saying, you know, oh, it was so wonderful, and to reacquaint with all these people and everything. And then I hear from those who, oh, I'm just shooting myself for not attending.
Oh, yeah. What do you think the lasting legacy of the Scottish Highlanders is for the university and the state of Iowa?
I think their ambassadorship. Mm-hmm. They're representing of the University of Iowa. They did nothing but positive exhibitions of good Iowa folk in a unique way.
Mm-hmm. And people remember them who
mm-hmm.
were entertained and delighted mm-hmm. to see them march and dance and pipe during the football halftime.
Yes, and that's what most people remember. Mm-hmm. It's the part that they never knew about, the underlying philanthropic endeavors that the group accomplished mm-hmm. that are unknown, that's part of what we're trying to bring out.
Good.
And to accompany the display, we're trying to create an interactive informational kiosk.
At the athletics?
So our job is not done yet.
Not done yet. Now you have good support with your husband, Tom.
Yes.
And you and Tom raised 2 children in Iowa City,
mm-hmm.
and you have 2 grandchildren, and where are they located?
Our daughter and her husband live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and our son and his wife and their 2 children live in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
So nobody's very close by.
But they will get a copy of this interview.
Yes, and they came for the reunion.
Good.
Yes,
Good.
yes. 6 years ago, when Penny and Karen and I started our endeavor to honor this group, somebody said, you know, 2011 is the 75th anniversary. Oh, okay, well, let's go ahead and plan a reunion. We had no idea, you know, we were doing 2 very labor-intensive jobs at the time, but it turned out wonderfully well.
And Heather, you brought so many wonderful memorabilia and the uniforms, and I appreciate it, and your husband helped bring them to the library. I just want to know, what do you think is the best part of living in Iowa City? I love to ask my guests this.
Oh my.
Do you have a favorite thing that Iowa City is to you?
The people and the education of that population and the various interest groups. I think that's so creative and unique. You know, you don't realize it till you travel somewhere else and kind of go,
Aren't we lucky?
this is their library, it's one
know.
shelf.
We are so lucky. And
We
we're
are
lucky,
very fortunate.
The university in the state's lucky to have you as an archivist
Oh,
and
thank you.
historian for this group. And I thank you so much
Well,
for coming.
thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to honor the group.
Good. My guest on One of a Kind has been Heather Adamson Stockman. She and her grandfather, father, and mother were deeply entwined in the beginnings and the history of the University of Iowa Scottish Highlanders. This group promoted, taught, and performed the arts of piping, drumming, and dancing. Heather was a dancer with the Highlanders in the 1960s. She and 2 other women gathered 75 years worth of documents, uniforms, memorabilia to create a lasting display for the general public to view. This display in the University of Iowa Athletics Hall of Fame honors this unique organization that brought joy and pleasure to so many. The Scottish Highlanders and Heather Adamson Stockman, one of a kind.